Are you searching for teacher CPD that leads to change, illuminates best practice and inspires your staff? Well, look no further. InnerDrive's Teacher CPD Academy is just what you need. The Teacher CPD Academy now also includes our Teaching Unpacked series, with Doug Lamoff exploring and analysing what great teaching looks like in the classroom. Email us now at tnt@innerdrive.co.uk to grab a free trial. tnt@innerdrive.co.uk.
Welcome to Tea and Teaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. I'm Arthur Moore, and with me, as always, it's Mike Harrell. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Arthur.
How are you today, buddy?
I'm good. I'm really good. How's your day been?
Yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been one of those classic days with the weather as it is. Just had a lovely day outside with the kids playing in the park. But I'm ready, Mike. I've sat down. I'm ready to kind of really go into the depths of this performance and learning mini-series that we've been doing. We spoke about in kind of this big educational level. We brought it into schools, and now we're going to bring it into people's classrooms, give them lots of ideas. So hopefully, listeners, get your notebooks ready because we've got the man on this because he's joined us again. Welcome back to Tea and Teaching, Singh. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here as always, guys.
Yeah, so Singh, I think we should jump right in. Like, we've talked about learning performance. Everyone's listened to those first two episodes. Everyone has. What should I be doing in my classroom to focus on learning rather than performance?
So I'm going to share like 3 guiding principles and then give some like really concrete ways in which we can use them. So the first one is understanding that there will always be a difference between what is taught and what is learned. And I don't mean that in the sense of like misconceptions and misunderstandings. That will also be the case. But understanding that just because I've taught it, just because it's like I've covered it on the curriculum or scheme of work, does not mean it has been learned. Forgetting is just inevitable. It's going to happen. It's affected by so many factors. So allowing ourselves and sort of freeing ourselves of that expectation that, I've taught it, therefore students have learned it, is really, really like liberating. That's the first principle, right? Just because it's been taught doesn't mean it's been learned. The second one is it's not the case that, learning good, performance bad. Learning is invisible. And what we want to do is measure performance in various contexts to draw some conclusions about learning. But that's not all what we want to do. Like, if I measure short-term performance, I want to measure short-term performance because if they can't do it correctly now, it's really unlikely that they're going to be able to do it correctly in the future. So actually, I do want to measure short-term performance in the knowledge that it's short-term performance because I want to make sure that I'm laying those foundations so that I have to undo it later on down the line. So first 2 principles, there's the difference between something being taught and something being learned. The second one is I want to measure short-term performance, not because it's like good or bad, but because it tells me if students can do something now, helps me lay those foundations. And the final one is there will be times where intentionally lowering or impairing that short-term performance will actually lead to better learning. Do you want me to go into some techniques, or do you want to unpack that a little bit?
No, let's jump into some techniques.
Let's jump in.
Let's go straight into them, Singh.
So we spoke last time about this experiment where students went into 3 groups and they were asked to read a passage of text. And this was really testing retrieval practice. So that's what the experiment was looking at. And what they found was, as we said last time, students who had lower initial performance, like the performance was intentionally impaired in that short-term measure, actually produced better longer-term measures versus students who'd been able to reread it and had higher short-term performance. So what we're saying is there will be times where actually giving students an opportunity to just retrieve stuff is probably going to be better than just getting them to look at their textbook or look at their notes and just read through that information instead. Now, there is a really important nuance here in that if students have nothing to retrieve, they are not going to benefit from retrieval practice. So there's like a tension here between making it really hard. So we want them to be thinking effortfully. Going back to Mike's analogy last time, like we want them to be in that trench of learning where they're having to like actively claw their way out really effortfully, but we also want them to actually be able to get out. Like, we want them to be successful, because if they're not successful, they're just stuck, right? If they can't retrieve it, they're not going to get the benefits of retrieval practice. So what we might do is we might give them some retrieval practice. Let's say we give them a do now, right? That goes back on topics or content they've previously been taught. What we might find is that some students get all of it correct, some students get most of it correct, and some students really struggle. There are a few questions they just don't get. What we could do is just give them all the correct answers at the start of the lesson, right? We give you 5 questions, off you go, and then we give them the 5 answers afterwards. And then at the end of the lesson, we take a minute just to go back and redo that exact same task. And this seems counterintuitive, because it's like, well, I only have so much time anyway. Now you're asking us to do more things in that time. And it goes back to the point we touched on last session. Like, it's a relatively short amount of time, but crucially, you'll make that time, because you won't have to spend it later on down the line having to fill these gaps in their knowledge. If students have got it wrong, we can just give them the correct answer. An analogy from Christian Still, I went to one of his research ed talks. He talked about, a car that's stuck in the mud. Like, if all they're doing is spinning the wheels but not going anywhere, it's not really productive. What we want to do is just give that car a tow rope and pull it out, and then they can go. And what you're saying is, if students are thinking really hard but they're not getting the right answer, it's not really productive. Like, give them the right answer and then get them to retrieve it over and over and over and over again. Because that way, they're getting the benefits of retrieval practice and they're experiencing success. It's really, really motivating. So they struggle at the start of the lesson, we repeat it at the end. Hopefully, because we've given them the answers already, they should get it right. And then there's nothing wrong with doing that repeatedly. There's nothing wrong with using those same questions. Maybe, we might, in maths, might change the numbers or change the context really slightly. Nothing wrong with doing that next lesson or the lesson after, or reusing those do nows. Actually, I think they're a great way to embed that learning. And this is that second technique we spoke about, or that Donlowski speaks about, which is distributed practice or spaced practice. So this idea that there are some strategies that we just want to continuously come back to. And do you want me to go into it? I feel like I'm on a roll here, but please do feel free to disrupt it.
No, keep rolling.
Okay,
keep rolling.
Cool, right. So he talks about this experiment where students were given 20 French and English vocabulary pairs to learn. The students were put into 2 groups. The first group had 30 minutes from 0 to 30 to look at these French vocabulary pairs. After the 30th minute, they were then tested and asked to write down how many they could remember. The second group were given 30 minutes in 10-minute blocks. So they did it over 3 consecutive days. So let's say, Monday they had 10 minutes, Tuesday 10 minutes, Wednesday 10 minutes. And again, after the 30th minute, they were asked to, asked to write down as many as they could remember. And to little surprise, the group who had the 30-minute block significantly outperformed the other group who were given that spread out over time. A week later, they were given the same test, and it was a surprise test. The fact that it's a surprise is important. It means they weren't lots of studying in between and weren't able to cheat. What they found was that, again, the results sort of flipped, right? That actually the group of students who spaced out that practice did much better than that group of students who blocked it. And so by continually coming, even though they've spent the same amount of time, we talk about time a lot, they've spent the same amount of time, but just by spacing it out and letting ourselves come back to it repeatedly, we are getting better gains in long-term learning. We're more likely to retain that information. So how could we do that? We could reuse those do-nows. We could use the same slides. I don't think there's anything wrong. In fact, the research would suggest it's probably a good idea to just do those again fairly frequently. There's nothing wrong with doing that. We could reset homeworks that we've already set. And I think this is a great way of being efficient in your time, particularly if you've got online platforms. If you've got a Sparks, MathsWatch, there's so many platforms out there, Carousel, Dr. Frost, absolutely loads of platforms. If you've got an online platform to set homework, I would say there's nothing wrong. In fact, it's probably beneficial for students to go back and just redo a homework that they did a couple of weeks ago, because A, they're likely to have forgotten it, so they're going to have to think really hard about it, and B, they're more likely to be successful at it because they've already done it. So we're getting students some benefits of learning and some success. Like it's essentially a win-win. So those are two like sort of concrete things I think we can do in the classroom to support student learning. I'll take a breath there.
I really like the homework one thing where we're just like, we're so sometimes obsessed with teachers of making new stuff, but sometimes reusing stuff that quite often students have got wrong. So we make all these great questions, students have got half of them wrong, and we never touch them again. I think that's a really practical idea for lots of teachers. But also you're saying to the students, when you give the homework, like, I know you can do this because you have done it in the past. So like it makes it accessible to them. They know they are able to do this. They know they might find it difficult because learning's hard, but they know they have that ability, and it maybe kind of gives them a bit of motivation to kind of maybe look back over their notes or kind of get out their flashcards or think about what you said in that previous lesson, especially if this is kind of part of your classroom practice and they know the work they've done is going to come up in a couple of weeks. So it is worth kind of, I can't just say, oh, I didn't get it today. Oh, it's just one lesson, I'll ignore it, which I don't know about your subject, Mike, but in maths, we quite often find that like a student they miss that session or for whatever reason, and it has consequences down the line that we can't even think of. And my other thoughts in just listening to yours, kind of everything you've spoke about kind of has the same ethos behind it of just like, this is not about doing lots of extra stuff. It's about just doing stuff in an order so you get extra benefits from them. So it's not about creating hundreds and hundreds more worksheets, whatever. It's about creating that maybe one worksheet that you use repeatedly to get loads of benefits. Mike, I don't know what your kind of takeaways were from kind of Singh's kind of full deep dive into the world of...
I loved it. And I think it's two things you could go away and do in your lesson tomorrow with minimal effort. Right, I've already done my do now start task with 5 questions on. So I'll just change that slide to do again, put it at the end of my lesson, and then use that to review. I've already set that homework 2 weeks ago, so I'll reset that homework. And I know maybe 50% of my students really struggled with that homework. So that's a good piece to pick and do again and measure maybe an improvement in performance over time that might show some learning. I think they're really, really easy strategies for people to listen to this and use. So I love them. But I think, again, it's just about being really, really conscious about your practice and really thinking through what you're doing, when you're doing it, and why you're doing it in that order. I think you spoke in episode 1, Singh, about I've got a lesson plan, so I'm going to teach it. But actually, what is on that lesson plan? Why have I planned it in that way? What am I trying to get out of this? And really having that kind of conscious decision to do things in a lesson for a reason.
Yeah. And I think there are a couple of things to bear in mind there. Firstly, on like the individual teacher level, like absolutely. We've all gone through training to get to the point we have. Like we need to trust ourselves that actually I'm going to make this decision because it's warranted. Because like ultimately you're the expert in your students. Like, no one knows your students in your subjects better than you do. And in primary, no one knows your students in any subject better than you do. Like you are the expert in that context. And acknowledging that and sort of saying, actually, I think this might be better if we put that lesson off and come back to that topic, because in order to get there, they really need to know this thing. And I'm not convinced they know this thing, even though they did it, they should have done it, or perhaps it's a better phrase, whenever it was, like just taking that time to be like, no, I'm going to go and do it. And even if you do it and you find out, they're actually pretty good at it, you've already got that lesson ready to go anyway. So you can just bring it forward if you need to. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with getting students to do lots and lots of practice of stuff that they perhaps are already pretty good at. Like, if we only know anything about expertise, that's how we get better at stuff, right? Like, expert athletes don't suddenly get to a point where they're like, I'm good. Like, I'm just going to sit this one out, lads. Like, you guys go ahead, right? Like, it just doesn't happen. Like, they'll practice the same thing or slightly different thing over and over and over again, despite, playing that sport for years, decades in some cases. Then we can think about learning and sort of more academic subjects, less practical ones, in the same way. Like, actually, if we're giving students opportunities to practice a skill, they're being successful at it, like we said earlier, that's a win-win. So that's on that individual teacher level. But I think there's like a level above that, which is we need to give teachers the freedom, the autonomy to make those decisions. Like, if they are in a high trust environment where they feel empowered to say, actually, yeah, I am the expert in my classroom with my students, I'm going to make this decision, knowing that my team, my line manager will support me, that they are going to make similar decisions for their classes. Like, that's also really important. I think you have to have both, and having one can lead to a challenge. If you have a teacher who's really keen to do that, but in an environment that doesn't support it, it makes them potentially feel like they're having to justify what they're doing a lot of the time. But if you have a teacher who's not doing that in an environment that does encourage it, then it's about encouraging that teacher and supporting them to be empowered and make some of those decisions.
And that's, I would know, as a head of department earlier on in my career, that would have given me palpitations. That thought that all my year 7 classes might be at the end of term 2, all at very different points of my program of study. And I'm suddenly thinking, some of them are going to get through it really quick. Some of them are going to be stuck back there. So it's a real brave decision by leadership of a school, leadership of a department, to allow staff that autonomy to do that.
Yeah, and there's definitely a balance. Like, we don't want sort of, free for all, where every teacher's just teaching whatever they want. We want it to be, for a number of reasons, we want there to be some sort of structure, but have some flex within that structure. And I think the thing that's worth bearing in mind is, yeah, at the end of term 1, or even at the end of term 2, like, they might look quite different, but by the time they get to the end of year 11, they're probably all going to be at the same point, right? Like, if that part of that trust is acknowledging, this process will look different in these like snapshots we take, but we're looking at a much, much bigger picture here. When we look at that, well, they started in year 7 and year 11, they're probably all going to be at roughly the same point. That's where we sort of can provide some comfort and some reassurance, I guess.
But I think it can also be a really powerful thing to say to the students at the very start of year when you've got them in, or when you take over that class in primary, just to say, like, I care about how you do today, but I also care about how you do next year when you're not in my class. And I also care when you move on schools and how you're doing then. And everything I do now is to help that long-term learning, rather than just making sure you get my homework that I'm setting you right next week, which, if you think about it, makes no sense, because I know you. So I could easily set you homework that you're going to get 100%. Everyone pats themselves on the back. We go home. And that's kind of not what education is about. You said something like, we've all kind of learnt stuff to train as teachers. Like, that's not how it works. You have to think about these things that you come back to again and again. And what you were saying, Mike, just like, as a head department, it's great, isn't it, when you've got like everyone kind of doing the same thing, even if they're doing it differently with their styles of teaching or the nuance of kind of the art of teaching. But if everyone's starting with those do-nows and you share those across your department, like, what an easy resource for everyone to have. Every student knows that when they go in next year, they've got a different teacher, maybe a teacher who's not even at the school yet. They know how it's going to look. And that kind of alludes, doesn't it, back to the kind of what we spoke to in episode 2 of just kind of, as a school-wide culture, having kind of an understanding what learning and performance is. And as you said, Singh, kind of like being okay with that. One of the key notes I keep taking is you keep saying, like, acknowledging, I may have taught something, but they haven't learnt it. And that can be, it's scary to think that, maybe, but it's also quite liberating to be like, maybe my lesson, I don't have to put hours and hours for it to be the perfect lesson, because they're probably not going to remember some of it anyway.
Yeah.
That's not nice, but it's quite liberating to feel that, because it takes the pressure off me in that moment. It puts the pressure on me to be kind of think longer term about them, which is what maybe education should be about.
I mean, it's exactly the same sort of emotional roller coaster I went through when I came back to a similar realization. Like, my gosh, I've spent all this time planning these amazing, passable lessons, and students just don't, like, they're just not going to remember it. And I was really sort of, burst my bubble about it. But actually, then I was like, the way to think about it is actually, I don't need to spend all of that time and effort on like the minutiae of my lesson, making sure that I nail every single one. Like if I have an off day, it's not the end of the world. Like if I, make like slightly misjudge my students' prior knowledge and don't pitch my lesson at quite the right level, it's not the end of the world. Like learning isn't the case of a lesson. It's not transformational. Nick Rose and David Ida in the book talk about this. They sort of say, like, we often think about, we live for those like light bulb moments. And actually what they say is learning doesn't tend to happen in these sort of transformational moments. It's much more incremental. It's much more sort of drip fed than that. And so understanding that, if one lesson isn't, my best, or I don't hit the mark every single day I come in, it's okay. I'm not working on the scale of days or weeks. Like, we're working on the scale of years.
Mike, do you feel like that's something you develop kind of with your experience as a teacher? Because when you're new to teaching, there is a lot of pressure on every lesson because it's the first time you've taught it in that context. Whereas maybe kind of with your experience, like you can take a step back and go, right, this lesson I didn't nail, but I know why. I'm going to correct that next lesson with my do nows, or I'm going to correct that next term with my retrieval practice plan for that term.
Yeah, do you think it's something that you become more comfortable with once you've seen maybe a cohort the whole way through? So you've taken them from year 7 to year 13 or year 11, and you've seen that process go through, and you've actually seen the process of long-term learning, that actually you make a little piece for that. You become more comfortable with it, as opposed to I remember when I first went into teaching, it was very short-termism. It's like, I've got this class now. I want this class to be the best at this. I want them to learn this. And you put a lot of pressure on yourself to get instant results and instant gratification that your planning's working. And maybe it's something that it takes years to get, not like you can be aware of it, but maybe it takes years to get comfortable with that.
I think that's a really important point as well. Like, Arthur, you spoke last time about that notion of accessible challenge. I love that phrase. And like understanding that there will be times in our lessons where I've intentionally set a task that I know students are going to struggle with. Some of them might even get some questions wrong. It's really easy to talk about that as an abstract concept, but to be in a lesson where, 5, 6, 7, 8 kids are getting stuff wrong, where I can see the like mental strain on students' faces, you can't help but ask, have I done some damage here? Like, have I misjudged the level of difficulty? It'll be almost inhuman not to have that sort of emotion, but to provide yourself that reassurance, like Mike said, like, it is incremental. It is giving ourselves permission. Like, I think empathy has to be both from a personal level, but also a sort of cultural and a system level. Like, it has to be the guiding principle in all of this.
So can we flip that just to kind of round up, saying, like we spoke about kind of experienced teachers there. If you had an ECT come into you and be like, I'm getting ready for the first time I'm teaching this, or my second term, or first year, whatever, and you kind of want them to kind of take one thing away from kind of everything we've spoke about, like what's that kind of essence that you want them to kind of take into their teaching career so they can develop that experience that kind of Mike was alluding to, that then kind of brings all these benefits?
To be honest, I think it's more what the two of you have talked about, which is that reflective process that happens afterwards. Like, if you pitch a lesson and it's not quite, like, doesn't quite hit the mark, like, that can be bad if you don't make changes, if you don't adapt following that, if you don't go through that reflective process. But we aren't all going to teach the best lessons we possibly can all the time. Like, we're just not robots, and we will occasionally get things wrong, and that's okay, as long as afterwards you do things you were saying, Arthur, of like, well, what changes am I going to make next time I teach this lesson, or next time I teach this class? How am I going to account for some of the gaps that I noticed this time, or some of the like misconceptions that I hadn't anticipated? What am I going to do about those? Actually, I think if you are, and this is as true for an ECT as for any teacher, to be honest, but really, I think one of the most powerful things we can do as teachers is go through that reflective process each time we teach a lesson and ask ourselves, what am I going to do differently when I teach this topic again? What am I going to do differently when I teach this class again?
Hopefully, listeners, kind of this this mini-series and all the mini-series kind of Mike and I are putting together at the moment, it helps you take a moment to sit back and kind of reflect and think, Like, what can I do to be even better at a job I'm probably already really, really good at? Like, and that doesn't matter whatever stage you're in teaching. Like, that's kind of part of the awesomeness of this profession. What a pleasure it's been to have you back on Teen Teaching. I know there's going to be people who have listened to this being like, that guy knows what he's talking about. I want to go find out more about Singh. Just to stress, that was Singh, not Mike. Mike loads of stuff as well. Singh, where should people go? Like, they've listened, they've bought into brand Singh. What do they do? Where do they go?
If anyone has been interested in any of the discussions we've had, please do feel free to follow me on Twitter. So you can just type in Amarbeer on Twitter and I'll come up. I also have a blog, the link for which is on my Twitter. But if you Google Unpacking Education, you'll see my posts. On my blog, you'll also be able to purchase a book that I wrote a couple of years ago for John Catt. So it's part of the In Action series, exploring John Dunlosky's Strengthening the Student Toolbox in action. All the profits which go to charity. So not only will you be supporting me, you'll also be doing your good deed for the day at the same time as well.
And as someone who has got that book and read it, like, it's a brilliant book. I cannot recommend that highly enough. And the other thing I think I would add there, Singh, is that if you ever go to a research ed or a conference and you see Singh's name down, go to that chat because, like, it's absolutely brilliant. I've been front row and centre with my notebook ready to go. And it's an absolutely brilliant, brilliant time. So, like, please do go and check out Singh. Follow him on Twitter. There's some awesome stuff there. And say hello to Singh when you see him at a conference, because I think Mike will be maybe the nicest man in education.
I don't know about that. There's definitely some awesome people out there as well.
Kind of proving my point there, Singh. Singh, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Teen Teaching. But Mike, it's also been a pleasure sharing some time with you. So thank you for your time, Mike. Pleasure as always.
Yeah, and you occasionally as well.
And Singh, thank you so much for joining us on Teen Teaching.
Thanks everyone, guys. Pleasure as always.
Listeners, please let us know what you thought of this mini-series on performance versus learning. Get in touch with us. Get in touch with us at Teen Teaching, or just get in touch with me and Mike. Just shout us in the street. We're more than happy to have a chat about education. Listeners, we'll see you next time on Teen Teaching. Mike, goodbye. Singh, goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Are you searching for teacher CPD that leads to change, illuminates best practice and inspires your staff?